Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 2 or learning plan number 2 for payroll accounting. This video is going to focus on the PowerPoint presentation in regards to payroll system procedures that is covered in lesson plan number 2. So what we're going to focus on is the employer payroll concerns along with calculating payroll for the employer. So when employer starts beginning payroll, some of the concerns that they have to take into consideration is the pay frequency, the pay types, if it's direct deposit, pay cards, or paper checks, the employee benefits that will be offered for their company, pay advances, confidentiality, and fraud protection on the payroll side of accounting. So some of the things to identify on the payroll procedures and pay cycles is the reporting requirements by the federal and local governments, the deadlines, and other compliance issued for the industry. Some companies must take into consideration the employees and who everyone is working for because they need to identify them when they file their tax returns. The EIN purpose, which is the employee identification number, identifies companies who file tax returns. It's required for partnerships and corporations. All right, it is required if a firm has employees, acts as a fiduciary, and is in the alcohol, tobacco, and firearm industry. The EIN will be canceled if the principal officer's name and social security numbers do not match the IRS records. That's very, very important that they must match. If they don't match, the IRS will conduct an audit to figure out exactly what happened with the company. The EIN number, which is, like I said, the employer identification number, is a permanent federal identifier for the company. Every business has an EIN number. It must accompany the tax deposits, the payroll tax returns that are conducted for Forms 940, 941, 942, along with the W-2s and W-3s, and any 1099s that are completed for independent contractors. State may issue different identifying numbers depending on where they operate within the state. Some non-confidential documents that take place within an organization for payroll is the expense receipts. Those are non-confidential, vendor invoices, and check copies. These items, also keep in mind, are very relevant in regards to an audit, if a company would go through an audit for the payroll purpose. Some of the confidential company documents is follow the Privacy Act of 1974, which is the personal information of all employees, and payroll documents. Within every organization, there should be some secured room or some secure server options available, so the parties that are only allowed to see payroll information only have access. You don't want too many people involved in doing payroll along with having access to employee information, because that is when identity theft can take place along with fraud. Payroll file requirements for the employee: they must file the employee's full name, social security number, complete address, birth date if they're younger than 19, the sex, and occupation. Now, in order to make sure that the company is following payroll guidelines, they must follow some type of payroll compensation laws or rules. The time and day when the work week begins, the hours and pay along with the total hours per week, the basis of their wages, the hourly rate, total straight line earnings, total overtime earnings, along with additions, deductions, total wages paid, along with the date paid. This all must be filed within the company for their payroll purposes. It follows GAAP guidelines along with all the federal guidelines in order to reduce fraud and to be sure that they are in compliance with all laws and regulations. All right, this is an example of an employee earnings record. As you notice here, you got the name, the hire date, address, date of birth, their position, if they're full-time or part-time, the number of exemptions, if they're married or single, Social Security number, the rate of pay, and if they get paid hourly, weekly, or monthly. And as you notice here on the employee's earning records, it shows the period ending, the hours worked, the regular pay, overtime pay, gross pay, and then all the taxes and deductions that are taken off the employee's check, along with the net pay for that employee. Payroll cycles usually are used in a day labor situation, often paid at the end of the day or next day if they're paid daily. Most companies will pay weekly or bi-weekly, usually pay the Friday of the following week for 52 periods in a year. If it's weekly, 52 weeks in a year. If it's bi-weekly, employees are paid every other week, which is 26 pay periods per year. Semi-monthly is twice a month. Usually employers will pay like on the 1st or the 10th, or maybe the 15th or the 30th. And in that type of situation, there's 24 pay periods within a year. Or the company can pay the employees monthly, which is once a month, which is 12 times per year. Lesson number 2, prepare the employee documentation, which we're going to complete the form W-4. When an employee starts with a new employer, the W-4 must be completed. This is the employee's withholding allowance certificate. As you notice, you got the employee's name, last name, and social security number, address. You're supposed to note if they're singled. If the number of withholdings, if they're single, they should file a single. If they're married, they can file married. Or they can do married with withhold at a higher single rate. The total number of allowances you are claiming. These are number of allowances or deductions that you're claiming off your payroll check. So, for example, on my payroll check, I have 4 allowances, which is 1 for myself, 1 for my husband, and 1 for our 2 kids. Then once they fill that top form out, they sign and date it. The reason why new hire reporting must be done, it is for child support tracking. It is very important that this is done because that is how they be sure that child support is being paid appropriately. Employment eligibility verification, permanent resident alien tracking, and other garnishments for credit card companies or court judgments. So that is why the W-4 is very important to be completed. Child support, as of 2010 U.S. Census, the estimated amount of child support transferred between parents exceeded $41.7 billion per year. The other items I like to go through real quickly. The statutory employees is a driver who's a single company agent or is paid on commission. Full-time life insurance sales agent for one life insurance company. It could be a home worker who works on a company's provided materials, or they're full-time traveling, or a city salesperson who works on a single company's behalf. All right, lesson number 3 in chapter 2. Pay rate determination. Employers can start employees off with different pay rates, even if in the same positions. The employee could be based on their experience, their education, their certifications, could be because of government regulations, hours worked, and job performed. The employer can pay their employees by salary, hourly, commission, piece rate, exempt, or non-exempt. Okay, so some of the items the employers take into consideration when they do hire an employee is the employee skills, plus the employee structure within the organization will equal the compensation. The reason being is that you want to be sure that the amount of money that the employer is paying for those employees. All right, the next slide talks about the calculations of time for exempt employees. In this example here, the employee normally works 40 hours per week. In June, he worked 85 hours during one pay period and 75 hours during the next. He would receive his salary of $2,000, which is $52,000 divided by 26 paychecks, since he gets paid bi-weekly for each pay period, no no matter how many hours, because he is classified as an exempt employee. Remember from chapter 1, an exempt employee, you're only paid your wage with no overtime pay. For non-exempt employees, an example here is that during 1 week she worked 50 hours. She would earn her regular weekly wage of 1,000, which is 52,000 divided by 52 weeks, plus time and a half for the overtime hours. Based on a 40-hour work week, her hourly wage is $25. So $52,000 divided by 52 weeks times it by 40 hours, her overtime pay would be $375. So 1,000 of her regular wage plus the $375 for her overtime, her total wage would be $1,375. All right, internal controls for retention of the payroll system. It's very important for managers to verify the time cards, verify the payroll computations, approve the pay amounts for the employees that they supervise, preparation of pay disbursement, and approval of pay disbursement. It's very important that companies do have a file security system as part of the internal control. It also is a safeguard for governmental obligations. It involves multiple passwords, personnel cross-training, electronic encryption into their server, restriction access, and duty rotation on the employees that do perform payroll transactions. Payroll fraud, I'm not going to go through this example. It's a great example to look at. Payroll fraud does happen. Some of the best practices to prevent payroll fraud is the IRS Regulation 26. The employee is responsible for file maintenance, recommends labeling and storage of all backup information for payroll, and they must guarantee auditor access. The IRS revenue procedures 90 through 25. Record keeping duration for employers must include payroll transaction details. It must be benchmarked and justified. Best practices is electronic records instead of paper forms. Just because it's a closed system, you can limit the access to employees, records, identifiers, along with logging on the times in and out of the payroll system, and they can monitor the records for hacker activity. All right, some other items I'd like to go through just real quickly is termination and document destruction procedures, paper records. When an employee leaves, you should keep them for a certain amount of time. You should shred them. Termination pay regulations. Termination types are involuntary, which is a firing or layoff, or voluntary resignation, which is just quitting the job. The final pay must contain all the hours worked by that employee, vacation and sick time owed to the employee, and any other compensation owed or due. That is part of the regulations when an employee leaves the company. This is also in your book on pages is by state. Every state's got some different regulations in regards to terminations and when they should be performed. And it is on page 55 and 56 in your book. It talks about Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, next regular payday or monthly, whichever is sooner, is when you have to pay out the employee's vacation and sick pay. All right, summary of payroll system procedures. Payroll systems require careful planning. Records may be paper, computerized, or outsourced. They must be maintained securely and allow auditor access. Final pay for terminated employees must reflect all the amounts due. So, like I said, this is just a quick discussion, a quick video on the PowerPoint presentation that is located in the learning plan for chapter 2. Also in the learning plan number 2, I do have rules for rounding for payroll. For example, an employee withholding is $1.235. to 1.239 will be rounded to